Thank you so much, Wayne. Merci. Bonjour à vous tous et toutes. Apologies that I have to wear my reading glasses, but I'm an inveterate scribbler, and even though the folks back in Ottawa prepared this beautiful speech in 22-point font for me, I spent most of this morning rewriting it, and I can't read my own handwriting. So bear with me because I have to wear my glasses. I would really love to thank Deborah and Cheryl for their beautiful welcome to your traditional territory. You've made us feel so welcome here. And I'm so delighted. I always love to come back to Vancouver. It truly is one of the most beautiful, beautiful cities in the country. And certainly one of the most accessible. I wanted to share a story with you about my first visit to this city about 15 years ago. I was here on business. And I was at a meeting at a hotel on Granville Island. And after the meeting, I went out to the parking lot and I was able to flag a wheelchair accessible taxi. I was able to actually roll out in my scooter and wave, and a wheelchair accessible van drove up and I could get into it and go to my next meeting. That was a revelation for me. That was the first time in my life, in my career, that I'd been able to do that. What a great feeling of independence. And it was just, it was a breathtaking experience for me. And it wouldn't have happened in any other city in Canada at that time. Vancouver was really at the forefront in terms of the work it was doing on accessibility. Now, this isn't to say that it's perfect. We all know, everybody in this room knows, that the march to a truly inclusive society is an ongoing one, and it requires the efforts of everybody. And just to that point, Wolfgang and I were chatting last night about some of the challenges we've been facing in this lovely hotel that is welcoming us, and it's a little bit ironic that it is a hotel dedicated to hosting people, and we're having a conference about disability management, and yet they're accessible hotel rooms, not one of them has a roll-in shower. So imagine for people in wheels who don't get into bathtubs. So all that to say, it is an ongoing journey, and there are always opportunities for us to learn from each other, which is why I'm so thrilled to be here at this conference, because so many of you are doing leading-edge work in this business of inclusion and managing to improve the life of people with disabilities. Today in Canada, I would say that we are developing a new appreciation of diversity and inclusion in society. We are coming to recognize these as strengths that are fundamental to the success of modern nations and to their governments. As you all know here, it's about empowering everyone, including people with disabilities, to be independent and the best they can be. Because we all know that disability isn't necessarily something you're born with, like me, or even something that lasts an entire lifetime. You can have a disability at a certain time in your life and not others. You can recover from disability. That's why the focus of this conference is on ensuring that what we're doing is we're creating environments that allow everyone to flourish and make their best contributions to society throughout their lives and careers. Diversity only becomes our strength when people such as you take action and move mountains to include and empower people with a variety of lived experiences. Today, I'm going to be speaking to you about the steps that the federal government is taking to do that, particularly through its historic legislation, Bill C-81, the Accessible Canada Act. But before I do that, I'd like to give you a little bit of context, tell you a little bit about the preparations that led up to this landmark legislation, what we learned along the way, and why these lessons are important for Canada and for other countries facing the same issues. You heard Minister Qualtrough speak about the legislation. There were massive consultations that went from June 2016 to February 2017. These were consultations with Canadians from coast to coast to coast, involving many, many, many people with disabilities who shared their thoughts and their ideas and their concerns on inclusivity and what they expect from their government and their dreams about a government and a public service that's inclusive and welcoming. These were the most accessible consultations the public service has ever undertaken. Every consultation had simultaneous interpretation, was as barrier-free as it could be, even the consultations that we were doing in our northernmost communities. And it was so wonderful to go to places where people were telling us that for the first time, they were feeling included in a consultation because there was interpretation available for them, because there were no barriers for their access. It shouldn't be so hard, and we shouldn't have to feel like we're doing something special or extra by including people. As we've heard from some of our speakers already this morning, these are things that just make sense if you want to be successful as a business or as a country. I wanted to share with you some of the work that we did within the public service in the lead up to this legislation. We did a lot of analysis of surveys. I'm sure many of you in the different organizations you're in are familiar with employee engagement surveys. And we have an annual public service employee survey that has 100 different questions. And I just learned this little factoid. This is the second largest survey undertaken in the country next to the census, simply because of the size of our public service. So we get very robust data. And sadly, what the data tell us from this survey when it comes to public servants with disability is a story of exclusion. Of the 12,000 public servants who responded to the survey in 2017 and who identified as having a disability, many consistently report facing challenges at the federal workplace in a much greater proportion than those who do not self-identify as having a disability. So, for example, public servants with disabilities report higher rates of harassment and discrimination, of feeling emotionally drained after their workday, and that their work-related stress is very high. They also report feeling less engaged, less empowered, and less respected than their colleagues. I suspect this isn't a surprise for many of you in this room, given the work that you do. And our recruitment trends in the public service are also not going in the right direction. In 2015-16, the public service recruited 12,500 people, only 410 of whom were persons with a disability. Our target was 703. At the same time, public servants with disabilities are increasingly either taking early retirement or leaving the public service for medical reasons. We lose more than 2 people with disabilities for every one that we hire. That starts to tell us a story, doesn't it, about how inclusive our workplace really is. And Wayne's story about his chauffeur is a really, really excellent case in point. It doesn't matter where you are in the hierarchy. The system has not been designed to help you continue with your career. So we know we need to do a better job of hiring people, and we know we need to do a much better job to supporting people if we want to enable them to contribute to their full potential. The sad story doesn't end there, though. We have more research into promotion rates in the public service. This is something that we like to track. And our Public Service Commission has conducted successive waves of research looking into promotion rates for what we call the designated employment equity groups as defined under the Employment Equity Act. And people with disabilities have the lowest promotion rates in the entire public service, lower even than other disadvantaged groups in the federal public service. So we know that we need to do better. And we know that it's not just the right thing to do from a moral perspective, it's also just the smart thing to do. We know that governments today need diverse views, experiences, backgrounds, and perspectives to find the best solutions to complex public policy problems. As we know from the tech example, we know that smart businesses have recognized you need to be diverse and inclusive if you're going to be competitive. Diversity and inclusion are crucial to the success of both modern nations and their governments. And we need to get the absolute best from our entire population. The work of the public service, for example, has always been tied to Canada's success as a country. We're the largest employer in the country. We operate an annual budget of about $300 billion. We have more than 200 federal organizations and dozens of different occupations spread out over every nook and cranny of the world's second largest country. We also have more lines of business and points of service than any other public or private Canadian organization. We have chauffeurs. We have environmental experts who work to create a greener future for Canadians. We have social workers who are helping offenders to make the most of their return to their communities. We have scientists whose research leads to innovative breakthroughs like the Space Vision System that helps astronauts to see in space. We have engineers who are making sure that our cars are safe to drive, and inspectors who ensure that our food is safe to eat. The list goes on and on. We like to say that from the moment you get up in the morning to the moment you go to bed at night, somehow our lives are being touched by something that a public servant has done. So we know that in today's world, we need a high-performing public service, one in which our employees, all of our employees, have the tools that they need to be productive and to also feel empowered and included and valued and safe to bring their true selves, to bring their best selves to the workplace. And this is what removing barriers to accessibility does. It enables everyone to bring their A game, their diverse experience and knowledge to the table, and to contribute to our collective success. We know we need more public servants with disabilities because the public service needs to represent the people we're serving. There's no question that we can become more diverse by increasing the representation of persons with disabilities. But the real challenge, and I think the one that everybody in this room is grappling with, is how do you make the culture change that is needed to make our vision of a barrier-free Canada and a barrier-free public service a reality? And that's what the new legislation, the Accessible Canada Act, proposes. It's going to give the Government of Canada new powers in many areas. It actually proposes the most significant progress for people with disabilities in this country in over 30 years. Once passed into law, it would enable the government to take a proactive approach to end systemic discrimination against people with disabilities in federally regulated workplaces. It will give the government the authority to work with stakeholders and Canadians with disabilities to create new accessibility standards and regulations that will apply to all sectors under federal jurisdiction. This means companies in banking, broadcasting, telecommunications, transportation industries like air and rail, and of course, the Government of Canada itself. The new regulated standards would set requirements for organizations to identify, remove, and prevent barriers to accessibility in 6 key areas: the built environment, meaning buildings and public spaces; employment; information and communication technologies; the procurement of goods and services; the delivery of programs and services; and transportation. The legislation is going to require that every organization that it covers develop something called a multi-year accessibility plan. Those plans are going to lay out what that organization is doing to identify, remove, and prevent barriers in those 6 areas. And what I love about those plans is consistent with the principle of nothing about us without us. Those plans are not just about what the organization is going to do. Those plans will also describe how the organization has engaged people with lived experience in developing the plan, in assessing the plan, and in providing ongoing feedback to what needs to be done. So in essence, the Act will give teeth to what are existing rights and protections for people with disabilities under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, under the Canadian Human Rights Act, and under Canada's commitments as a signatory of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The Act creates a legal framework to develop, implement, and enforce accessibility standards, to monitor outcomes, and to hold organizations to account. This is going to be huge. This has the potential to change the way the Government of Canada does business and serves Canadians, and to improve the lives of Canadians with disabilities and federal employees with disabilities. And as the largest employer in this country, we know that we have to lead by example, and we have to eliminate any and all accessibility barriers, whether they're architectural, physical, technological, or attitudinal. We have a very modest goal. We want to make the Public Service of Canada the gold standard of an accessible and inclusive workplace. Let me tell you, friends, we have a long way to go. Just to pick up on Wayne's point about his chauffeur, so there were no hand controls made available, or Wayne wasn't made aware of them. But today, how many years later, we do have fleet and vehicles for use by public service, including cars for deputy ministers. Not one of those deputy minister cars is accessible to somebody using a wheelchair. So we still have a little bit of a way to go. Let me give you an example of what we are doing around breaking barriers. We know that information technology is a key enabler that supports collaboration, innovation, and mobility. Unfortunately, the way information technology has evolved in the Canadian Public Service is that a lot of our existing technologies, most famously BlackBerries, for many, many years, public servants were required to use BlackBerries. And it's great, it's a Canadian company, fabulous success story, except it's not accessible for people with visual impairments. And I had a wonderful woman working for me with a visual impairment who was required to use a BlackBerry, even though it didn't work for her. Her iPhone that she had at home was amazing and worked beautifully for her needs, but she was not allowed to use it. And I think it's responses like that to people in the workforce that lead to those terrible outcomes when we do engagement scores. If you feel that your workplace isn't adapting to you, then you are going to feel that you're discriminated against, and you are going to feel that you're not welcome. So we're trying to change that. And one of the things that we're doing is we are changing the way we build our collaborative tools in the public service to something called the Open and Accessible Digital Workspace for Public Servants that will be built to accessibility standards. And to that end, the government just released the digital standards for the Government of Canada, which explains how we're going to approach becoming a digital workforce. And right at the beginning of their principles and guidelines is that it must include accessibility by design. So going forward, all of the technology that we acquire will have accessibility baked into it, and not as an afterthought, before it's purchased as part of the procurement process, and by including people with lived experience as part of the evaluation teams before we acquire these technologies. That's a huge culture shift, because too often what we do is we acquire things, buildings or technology, and it's only after the fact, after somebody has complained or said this doesn't work for me, that we try and fix it. We have not begun to calculate the costs associated with poor design, with not doing inclusive design up front, by having to retrofit. And I think if we did, I think we'd be horrified by what the cost is. So as we move forward with implementing the proposed legislation, one of the approaches we're taking is to working closely with partners in both the public and private sectors to realize a barrier-free Canada. One of the things that the legislation will do is to establish the Canadian Accessibility Standards Development Organization, dedicated to accessibility issues and led by people with disabilities. We are also going to be supporting the work of First Nations and Indigenous leaders and communities to improve accessibility, because one of the things that we know when we look at the data is that there's a disproportionately high incidence of disability among our Indigenous communities. And so this is a huge partnership area for us as well. There's also going to be an Accessibility Commissioner. It's a new position set up in the Canadian Human Rights Commission to monitor and report on accessibility in federally regulated sectors. And as Wayne pointed out, I've been appointed as the first ever Deputy Minister of Public Service Accessibility for the Government of Canada. And our goal is a simple one. It's to develop an overarching strategy and an implementation plan for the Government of Canada so that we can meet that gold standard that we've set for ourselves. And our work is going to be based on working with public servants with disabilities, with people like you who are committed to transforming workplaces, so that we can show leadership in meeting the requirements outlined in the Act. We're going to be working really closely to learn from the experiences of other countries, of the private sector. We know that in Canada, private sector is way ahead of us as a public service in many respects when it comes to building inclusive workplaces. We want to learn what works. We want to learn what doesn't. Some of the goals that we've set for ourselves in trying to become a gold standard include hiring 5,000 new employees with disabilities by 2025 and developing an internship program for persons with disabilities. We've also committed to doing an audit of all of our federally owned buildings to see how they stack up from an accessibility perspective. And we're also going to be working closely with individual departments and agencies to track what they're doing and how they're going to be reporting and what they're going to be putting in their multi-year accessibility plans. And coming back to the department that I'm in once again, the Treasury Board Secretariat, the Treasury Board acts as the employer on behalf of the public service. And it's taking a very interesting and holistic approach to accessibility. One of the things that we're doing is incorporating disability management into a comprehensive approach that looks at the well-being of employees from the moment they enter the public service to the time they leave. So as opposed to having one entity or one group of people looking at recruitment and somebody else looking at career progression and another group over here looking at disability management and somebody else looking at preparing to retire. The idea is to make it seamless and integrated. And one of the things that we're looking at doing is the idea of workplace adjustments or accommodations in that context. And one of the ideas we're hoping to pilot is this idea of an accommodation passport. So imagine you take your first job in the public service, and you identify what are the adjustments that you need so that you can be successful in your job. And that goes with you. It follows you throughout your career, and it can be adapted or changed as you need it, and it belongs to you as the employee. That is so different than how things currently work, how things work today in our public service. Every time an individual who has some kind of an adjustment requirement changes jobs, they have to relitigate. Every time you change a job, you have to ask, do I need a height adjustable desk? Do I need a screen reader? Do you know that you can't bring your screen reader with you from job to job in the public service yet? So every organization has to repurchase your equipment for you. Think of it. Think of how difficult we make it for managers and for employees. We have colleagues in the room with us today from the Government of Canada who are starting to innovate and designing their own pilot programs to look at new ways of doing this. And our hope is that we're going to be able to learn from those pilot projects and scale them up and do this public service wide so that public servants will have the tools that they need and the environments that they need to succeed in their jobs. So I want to thank you so much for coming to Vancouver, for participating in this conference, for being willing to share your best ideas and to learn from your colleagues. I think what's wonderful about this conference is that everybody here is committed to the very same principle, that all people have the right to lead full and meaningful lives, and that it's our responsibility to create the environment, to eliminate the barriers to making that a reality. So I wish you the best of success for the rest of the conference. Learn together, share together, and please continue your wonderful work in building a barrier-free world. Merci.